Money only answers to a name. Stop saying debt. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the words you speak over your money are the very words your money learns to obey. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 18, verse 21, it is written, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof." And here is the tender part. Every time you have said the word debt, every time you have sighed and called your bank account empty, every time you have looked at a bill and whispered, "I am broke," you were not describing your life, you were feeding it, and Florence Scovel Shinn would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? You thought you were reporting the news, but you were writing the news. The tongue does not report, the tongue creates. And the very supply you have been begging for has been standing quietly at the door of your own mouth this whole time, waiting for you to call it by its true and rightful name." So before we go any further, let us plant something true in the place of what has been spoken carelessly. Say it with me. I bless my money. I call it by its true name. My word is my wand. Again, I bless my money. I call it by its true name. My word is my wand. If something in you just went quiet when you heard that, if some old habit of calling your good by the wrong name suddenly felt exposed, type the 2 words God supplies in the comments right now. Let it be your seal. Let it be the new name you are choosing, God supplies. The first key is this: money only answers to a name. And for years you may have called it by the wrong one. You called it debt, you called it lack, you called it not enough, and it came dressed exactly as you addressed it. Think of it like calling a child in from the yard. If you stand at the door and shout the wrong name, a name that is not theirs, they will not come. They will not even turn their head. They are waiting for the sound that belongs to them. And money is the same. It is listening for its true name, which is supply, which is abundance, which is the free-flowing river that Florence Scovel Shinn said is your birthright and not your burden. And here is what makes this so easy to miss. The wrong name rarely arrives dressed as a complaint. It arrives dressed as ordinary conversation. A woman opens her banking app on a Tuesday morning, and before she has even finished her coffee, she sighs and says to no one in particular, "Of course, nothing ever changes." That sentence feels harmless, almost automatic. But it is a name, spoken plainly, over her own supply, and her money, faithful servant that it is, simply answers to what it was called. Later that same day, a friend asks how work is going, and she says, "Oh, you know, same old struggle." And she laughs a little when she says it, because it feels true, because it has felt true for so long. But truth and habit are not the same thing. And Florence Scovel Shinn would gently ask her, whose voice is that really? Is that the voice of your true supply, or is that simply the oldest name you were ever handed, and never thought to question? Now think of an old man who kept a small hardware store on the corner of his street. Every time a customer left without buying much, he would mutter under his breath, "Business like always, slow as ever," and he said it so often that his own clerks began saying it too, without even noticing they had picked it up from him. The store was not truly failing. The store was simply being called by a tired old name every single day, until one season he decided, almost on a whim, to stop saying it, and he replaced it with one quiet phrase: "My shelves are full, and my customers are coming." And though nothing about the shelves changed overnight, something about the way he stood behind that counter changed almost immediately. He stopped bracing for disappointment before the door even opened, and customers, sensing something warmer in the room, began to linger a little longer than they used to. You can test this today in the smallest way. The next time you go to pay a bill, notice the words that rise in you before you even think about it. If the words are, "There goes my money," or "I cannot afford this," stop, gently, and say instead, "I release this money in peace, and I trust more is coming. It will feel strange at first, like speaking a new language in your own mouth. But every new language feels strange before it becomes your own native tongue. Florence Scovel Shinn. The second key is this. The name you call your money is not a private matter. It is a public decree, spoken into the very air that shapes your circumstances. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that words are dynamic. They are not description, they are declaration. And every declaration goes out from you like a seed goes out from a hand. It does not stay in your mouth. It travels. It lands. It takes root somewhere. So when you say, "I am drowning in debt," that sentence does not evaporate the moment you finish speaking it. It goes to work, quietly, patiently, arranging your day to prove you right. This is why so many people pray for more money in the morning and then spend the rest of the day insisting to everyone around them how little they have. They are cancelling their own prayer with their own conversation. It is like planting a rose and then walking over the same soil every day, insisting nothing will grow there. The seed cannot argue with the footsteps. So it waits, and often it simply gives up. Consider a woman who prays each night for financial ease, and yet every time a friend asks how she is doing, she says, "Oh, you know, same old money troubles." She is not lying. She is simply unaware that she is re-signing the lease on her own lack every single time she speaks it. And notice how the day actually unfolds for her. In the morning she prays sincerely, with real feeling, asking for supply to open a way. By mid-morning a co-worker mentions a raise, and she laughs and says, "Must be nice, some people just have the luck." At lunch she tells the table she is saving money by skipping the cafe, but she says it with a small sigh, as though she is confessing a punishment rather than choosing a peace. By the afternoon a bill notification appears on her phone, and under her breath she mutters, "Of course, right when I need money the least." By evening, when her sister calls just to talk, she says the same tired sentence again, "Oh, you know, same old money troubles," and hangs up feeling strangely heavier than before. Not one of those sentences was dramatic. Not one of them felt like a decree in the moment. They felt like small talk, like harmless honesty. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the subconscious mind does not distinguish between a passing comment and a solemn vow. It simply tallies the words and builds accordingly. So by the time she kneels to pray again that night, for the very same ease she prayed for that morning, she has already spoken 5 or 6 sentences that quietly contradicted her own prayer, and the prayer, however sincere, is left standing outside a door that her own conversation kept closing all day long. Florence Scovel Shinn would gently take her aside and say, "Darling, stop renewing the contract. If you want a new name over your finances, you must stop repeating the old one out loud, even in passing, even as a joke, even to sound relatable to others who are also suffering. Because the tongue does not know the difference between a joke and a decree, it simply obeys the shape of the words. It is not that her prayer failed, it is that her conversation outvoted it. So this week, try this. Every time you feel the old sentence rising, the one about being broke, or drowning, or barely scraping by, pause, and replace it with a phrase that names your true condition. Not your current appearance, but your true and abundant nature. Say instead, "I am abundantly supplied," even before the supply is visible. Because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that we call those things that be not as though they were. And that is not denial. That is a higher kind of honesty. The honesty of the seed, calling itself a tree, before the world can see the branches. Notice, too, that this is not about performing cheerfulness you do not feel. It is about refusing to let a passing appearance be crowned with a permanent name. The bill on the counter is only weather. It is not your climate. So let your daily words match your climate, rather than your weather. And watch how quickly the whole atmosphere around your money begins to soften. Money only answers to a name, and it is listening for your voice to finally match the truth instead of the appearance. I call my money by its true name, and it comes. The third key is this. Forgiveness is not only for people, it is for numbers. It is for ledgers. It is for the very idea of debt itself. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that unforgiveness is one of the most common blocks to supply, and we usually think of that in terms of grudges against a person. But there is another kind of grudge that goes unnoticed. The grudge you hold against your own bank statement, the resentment you carry toward a bill, the quiet bitterness you feel every time you open an app and see a number that frightens you. That resentment is a form of unforgiveness, and it keeps the very thing you are angry at bound tightly to you, because whatever you resist with feeling, you attach yourself to more firmly. Think of a rope tied between you and an old debt. Every time you glare at that number with fear or shame, you pull the rope tighter. You are not loosening it, you are reinforcing it. But the moment you can look at that same number and say, I forgive this record, I release it into the light, and I call my finances by their true name of increase, the rope begins to loosen, not because the debt vanished by magic, but because your consciousness, which was gripping it in fear, has finally let go. And what the mind releases in peace, life is free to rearrange. Picture a man who owes a modest sum on a card. Every month he pays the minimum and mutters something bitter under his breath about how it will never be paid off. That mutter is a decree. It is renewing the very condition he says he wants to escape. But suppose instead each month as he makes the payment he says quietly, I bless this exchange. I forgive this record. I am moving toward complete freedom. The amount on the paper may be identical, but the atmosphere around it has utterly changed. And it is the atmosphere, Florence Scovel Shinn taught, that decides what comes next. Forgiveness clears the channel, resentment clogs it, and money, which only answers to a name, will not rush toward a name that is spoken with clenched teeth, but it comes readily to a name spoken in peace. There is a second layer here worth sitting with, because the grudge against a number often hides a grudge against a person. The ledger has a name written quietly beside it, a landlord, a former partner, a bank, even yourself on a day when you spent unwisely, and it is easy to forgive an abstract number while still nursing bitterness toward the hand that wrote it. Florence Scovel Shinn would say the forgiveness is not complete until it reaches the person behind the paper as well. So if there is a name attached to your debt, speak peace over that name too, not because they deserve to be excused, but because your freedom is not meant to wait on their apology. There is also the debt you carry toward yourself, the old purchase you still wince over, the year you overspent and still call yourself foolish for it every time it crosses your mind. That private unforgiveness toward your past self is a rope every bit as tight as any owed to a bank. And it must be loosed the same way, gently, deliberately, in words, saying, I forgive that year of my life. I release it. I was doing the best I knew, with what I understood then. Notice too how differently a forgiven bill feels in the hand. The same envelope, the same amount, and yet one carries dread, and the other carries simple, plain peace. That shift in feeling is the whole of the work, because Florence Scovel Shinn taught it is never the paper that binds you, it is the feeling wrapped around the paper. Change the feeling through forgiveness, and the paper becomes only paper again, no longer a chain. So pause for a moment, and pick one real bill or debt in your life right now, just one, and quietly say over it, I forgive you, I release you, I call you paid in a spirit of peace. And now let us continue. Before we move to the next key, a small word about walking this daily. Some of you have written asking for a steady place to practice these very principles each morning. That is exactly what the Overflow Covenant was created for. A short daily companion for calling in supply the Florence Scovel Shinn way. And we will speak more of it before we close. For now, let us continue. I forgive the debt in my mind, and it dissolves. The fourth key is this, and it is a deep one, so let us walk through it slowly. You are not just changing the name of your money, you are changing the name of yourself, because the money in your life has never been anything more than a mirror of the self you believe you are. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that no one can express, in their outer life, beyond what they secretly believe themselves to be. So if somewhere inside you carry the quiet self-concept of one who struggles, one who is always a little behind, one who was simply not born lucky with finances, then no amount of positive words spoken once in the morning will overturn that deeper, older name you have been calling yourself for years. And this is the piece so many people miss. They try to change their money words without ever touching their identity words. And it is like repainting a house whose foundation is still crumbling. The paint looks lovely for a week, and then the cracks come through again. And here is something tender to notice. That old self-concept was very rarely built by you alone. Most of us inherited it, the way we inherit a coat that was cut for someone else's shoulders, a parent who sighed over bills every evening, a grandmother who said money does not grow on trees so often that it became scripture in the household, a family story repeated at every gathering about how people like us never quite get ahead. You wore that coat because it was handed to you before you were old enough to ask if it fit, and you have been walking around in it ever since, mistaking its weight for your own body. Florence Scovel Shinn would say gently, "Take the coat off and look at it. It was never your skin. It was only ever a garment someone else stitched out of their own fear. And a garment can always be removed. So let us look honestly at how this shows up across an ordinary day. Because it is rarely dramatic, it is small, and it is constant. In the morning, you wake and check your phone, and before you have even had coffee, a small voice inside says, "Let us see how bad it is today." That is a self-concept speaking, not a fact. By mid-morning, a co-worker mentions a vacation they are planning, and something in your chest tightens, and you think, "Must be nice. Some people just have it easier." That too is a name you are calling yourself, quietly, the name of one who is left out of ease. At lunch, you decide against something you actually wanted, not because you truly could not afford it, but because a familiar voice says, "People like us do not spend on things like that." Notice that phrase, "people like us." That is identity language. That is self-concept dressed up as practicality. In the afternoon, an unexpected expense appears, a car repair, a medical bill, and instantly the old sentence rises. "Of course, this always happens to me." And you say it so automatically you do not even register that you just made a legal declaration over your own life. By evening, when a friend asks how you are doing financially, you say the same tired sentence you have said for years. "Oh, you know, just getting by." And you laugh a little when you say it, because it feels true, because it has felt true for a long time. But Florence Scovel Shinn would ask you gently, felt true, according to whom? According to a self-concept you adopted long ago and have simply never questioned since. Consider also a different kind of day, not the one with obvious struggle, but the quiet, respectable kind of lack that hides inside comfort. A man sits down once a month to review his savings, and though the number is not dire, he still feels a small dread before he opens the page, a dread that has nothing to do with the actual figures, and everything to do with an old identity that whispers you will never really get ahead, you will always be the one just managing. He closes the laptop a little heavier than when he opened it, not because the math failed him, but because the mirror did. He looked into his finances and saw the face of a self-concept that was formed decades earlier, long before this particular month, this particular job, this particular life ever existed. This is how deeply the old name can hide. Not always in crisis, sometimes simply in a quiet, well-dressed heaviness that never quite lifts. Now here is where the healing enters. And I want you to hear this clearly. When we speak of the old self needing to die, we are never speaking of you dying. We are speaking of a false and limited idea of you finally being allowed to dissolve, so that the real, abundant, supplied self that was always underneath is set free to live in the open. This death is a mercy, not a loss. It is the tight shoe finally coming off the foot. It is not you ending, it is a costume falling away. So if you have spent years wearing the identity of one who struggles, one who is always behind, one who was born on the wrong side of ease, that identity is not you. It was never you. It was simply a name you agreed to answer to because it was familiar, and today you can begin, gently, to stop answering to it. How do you do this practically? You do it the same way Florence Scovel Shinn taught her students to speak over money. You speak over yourself, and you do it in small, deliberate moments rather than waiting for one dramatic overhaul. When the phone buzzes with a bill, instead of, "Let us see how bad it is," try, "I am one who is always supplied. Let me see the proof of it." When the coworker mentions the vacation, instead of, "Must be nice," try, "My good comes to me too," in its own perfect timing. When you are tempted to say people like us do not do that, stop and ask, who are people like us? And choose instead, I am a person for whom there is always enough. When the unexpected expense appears, instead of course this always happens to me, try, this is handled easily, because I am supplied. And when a friend asks how you are doing, instead of the old, tired line, try something new, something a little braver. I am doing well. Things are actually coming together for me, even if it still feels like a stretch to say it. Say it. Because you are not lying. You are simply calling yourself by your true name a little earlier than the evidence has arrived. There is a simple practice you can add to your day that touches this key directly. Stand before an actual mirror, just for a moment, not to critique what you see, but to speak to it. Look into your own eyes and say, quietly, "You are one who is supplied. You always have been." And watch what happens in your own face when you say it. Most people flinch the first time, because the old name has been standing guard in that mirror for years, and it does not enjoy being addressed by a new one. But return to that mirror daily, and speak the new name daily, and slowly the flinch softens. Slowly the face begins to believe what the mouth is saying. This is not vanity, this is reclamation. You are simply taking back the naming rights over your own reflection. That is what faith has always been, calling the thing that is not yet seen by the name it will wear once it is seen. And money only answers to a name, but so do you. And the two names have been tangled together your entire life, so tangled that you may have believed they were one and the same thing. Your bank balance and your worth, your bills and your identity. But they were never truly fused. They only appeared fused because you never paused long enough to separate them. And the moment you do separate them, the moment you say clearly, "I am not my debt, I am not my lack, I am the one who names it," everything begins to loosen. Change the second name, the one you call yourself, and the first name, the one you call your money, begins to change on its own. Quietly, faithfully. The way a shadow changes shape the instant the light behind it moves. I am the master of my words, not their servant. Let us take a breath together here. If this teaching is meeting you right where you are, subscribe so the next one finds you gently. There is no rush, just stay close, and we will keep walking this together. The fifth key is this, and it is short, but do not mistake short for small. You cannot call in the new while still holding the door open for the old. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that we must make a clean break with the former self-concept, the way you would close a door firmly behind you when leaving a room you no longer live in. Some of you are still keeping the old name of lack on a kind of standby. You have not fully released it. You are just hoping the new name arrives before the old one is noticed missing. But supply does not work that way. It asks for the vacancy first. Think of a woman who wants a new job, but keeps refreshing the listing for the one she is trying to leave. She cannot fully step into the new until she stops checking on the old, or think of someone moving out of a small, crowded apartment into a home with far more room. But they keep paying rent on the old place just in case, keeping a key to it in their pocket, leaving a few boxes behind so it still feels like theirs. They will never truly live in the new home, while a part of them is still holding the lease on the old one. The mind behaves exactly this way with names. You cannot rent two addresses at once and expect either landlord to fully believe you live there. The same is true of your financial name. If you are still muttering, "I am so broke," under your breath, even while affirming supply out loud in the morning, you are keeping both doors open at once, and the mind, faithful servant that it is, will simply act on whichever door you visit more often, and most people, without realizing it, visit the old door all day long and the new door only once, briefly, at sunrise. So it is no wonder the old name keeps answering. Notice, too, how sneaky this can be. You say, "I am supplied," in your affirmation, and 20 minutes later you tell a coworker, "Ugh, I am so broke this month." And you do not even notice the contradiction, because the second sentence felt so casual, so ordinary, so true. But the subconscious does not grade sentences on how casually they were spoken, it simply counts votes. And the casual sentence, spoken all day, will always outvote the deliberate one spoken once. So today, make it deliberate, decide, out loud if you can, that the old name is finished, not fought, not resented, simply finished, the way you would close a book you have already read. Set it down gently, without slamming it, and do not pick it back up out of habit tomorrow just to see how the story ends again. Money only answers to a name, and it will not answer to two names spoken in the same breath. I release the old name. I claim the new supply. The sixth key is this: supply is not something you chase. It is something you open a window for. Florence Scovel Shinn often described the universe as full, generous, and endlessly willing. She taught that our good is always in transit toward us, moving the way a river moves toward the sea, without strain, without forcing, and that the only real work of the individual is to stop damming that river with fear, contraction, and the wrong words. Most people believe supply must be earned through anxious effort alone, and effort certainly has its place, but effort without an open channel is like rowing a boat while the anchor is still down. You can pull that oar until your arms ache, and the boat will barely move, because something underneath is holding you in place. The anchor, for most people, is the anxious grip they keep on money, the tight, fearful watching of every dollar, as though the moment their attention wavers, the money will vanish. But tight grip and open channel cannot occupy the same hand. Let me tell you about a woman we will simply call Grace, who ran a small bakery on a quiet street. Every morning before the ovens even warmed, she opened her ledger first, and every morning her shoulders rose toward her ears the moment she saw the numbers. Rent was due, flour prices had climbed, and a walk-in cooler had broken down the week before. So Grace kept every window of that little shop shut tight, literally and otherwise. She believed that if she relaxed for even one moment, disaster would slip in through the crack. She gripped the register drawer like it might be stolen from her by the very air. She counted and recounted and counted again, and still nothing changed, because Grace had confused vigilance with provision. She thought watching the river harder would make it flow faster. But a river does not answer to anxious watching. It answers to an open bank. And notice what this vigilance actually cost her, beyond the ache in her shoulders, because fear this constant does not stay quietly in the ledger. It climbs into everything it touches. Grace began salting her bread a little heavier than the recipe called for, telling herself it was to stretch the flour further, and it made the loaves taste of worry rather than wheat. She snapped at a delivery driver who arrived 10 minutes late, not because 10 minutes truly mattered, but because her whole body was already braced for one more thing to go wrong. Her regular customers began to feel it too, without quite knowing why. A bakery can be spotless and fully stocked, and still feel unwelcoming if the woman behind the counter is holding her breath. This is what Florence Scovel Shinn meant when she taught that fear is felt long before it is spoken. It moves through a room ahead of any words at all, and it was quietly thinning her customers even while she believed she was simply being careful. One afternoon, an older customer, a regular who bought bread every Thursday, said something simple to her. She said, "Dear, you bake as though the flour might run out mid-loaf. Why do you hold your breath while you knead?" And Grace realized she had been holding her breath, quite literally, for months. So she tried something small. The very next morning, instead of opening the ledger first, she opened the actual window above the counter, let the morning air in, and said quietly to herself, "This shop is already provided for. I am shown the way clearly." Nothing about the numbers changed in that instant. The rent was still due, the cooler was still broken, but something in her chest loosened. And within that same week, a neighboring shop owner, unprompted, offered to share the cost of a walk in cooler they could both use, a solution Grace had never even considered. Because her gripping hand had been too busy holding the anchor down to notice the rope that was already floating nearby, it did not stop there. Once the window was actually opened, small things kept arriving that had nothing to do with the ledger and everything to do with the atmosphere. A customer who had never ordered more than a single loaf asked, almost in passing, whether Grace could supply bread for a small wedding, a request that would never have been made to a woman who looked like she was rationing her own flour with her eyes. Ease attracts ease, the way tension attracts more tension, and Grace had simply changed which one she was radiating. This is the pattern Florence Scovel Shinn pointed to again and again. When we relax, release, and let go, we align ourselves with the very forces that were trying to help us all along. The tighter you hold the handle of your finances out of fear, the less room there is for anything new to be placed into your hands. But the moment you open your palm, even while the bill is still sitting there unpaid, something in the atmosphere shifts, and channels you did not even know existed begin to move on your behalf. This does not mean passivity. It does not mean doing nothing. Grace still baked, still paid what she could, still made the calls she needed to make. It means doing your part, while holding the inner window open rather than nailed shut with dread. Effort and ease are not enemies. They were only ever meant to work together. The effort is the ore, the open channel is the water actually being there to receive the ore at all. Money only answers to a name, and fear is a name too, a name spoken silently in the body, even when the mouth says nothing. A clenched jaw can whisper lack, just as loudly as a spoken sentence can. A held breath over a ledger is its own kind of decree. So today, notice where you have been anxiously gripping. Notice it in your shoulders, in your breath, in the way you check your account like you are bracing for bad news. And practice, just once, opening the hand instead of clenching it. Say it as you exhale, "I open the way for my good," and let the exhale itself be the proof that you meant it, because a window does not force the river to come. It simply stops pretending the river was never invited. My word is my wand, and I wave it wisely. The seventh key is this, and it is the deepest one we will walk through together. So let us take it slowly, the way you would walk through a garden you actually want to remember. And I want to unfold it in pieces, because a teaching this deep cannot be rushed through in a single breath, and some of what I am about to share will ask you to sit quietly with it, rather than simply nod along and move on. First, consider the root. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that every word is a seed, and every seed grows according to its own kind, not according to your wishes about it. This means the words you speak are never neutral. They are never just sound passing through the air. They are roots going down into the soil of your subconscious mind. And roots, whether you tend them consciously or not, will produce exactly what they are. A root called debt produces a tree called debt. A root called supply produces a tree called supply. You cannot plant one and harvest the other, no matter how sincerely you wish it. This is why simply wanting more money, while continuing to speak the old language of lack, never quite works. The wanting is real, but the root contradicts it. And the root always wins, because the root is planted deeper and tended far more often than the wish ever is. Think of a shopkeeper who opens his little store every morning and says, almost as a greeting to himself, "Well, business is slow, nobody has money these days." He does not mean it as a curse, he means it as small talk, as an observation, but Florence Scovel Shinn would gently stop him and say, "That is not an observation, that is a planting." He is standing at the door of his own shop, sowing the very words that will decide what walks through it. And sure enough, the register stays quiet, and he nods to himself as if he had merely predicted the weather, when in truth he had ordered it. So the first piece of this key is simply to become honest, gently but thoroughly honest, about what root you have actually been planting each day, not the root you wish you were planting, not the affirmation you say once in the mirror and then forget, but the root you plant in your unguarded moments, in your small talk, in your sighs, in the offhand comments you barely notice yourself making. The root is never found in your best sentence of the day. It is found in your most careless one. Second, consider the naming. In the old stories, the naming of a thing was never treated as a small ceremony. It was treated as an act of authority. Whoever named a thing was understood to hold a kind of dominion over it. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this ancient pattern is still alive in our daily speech. When you name your circumstance debt, you are exercising authority, but you are exercising it in the wrong direction entirely. You are handing dominion over to the very condition you long to be free from. When instead you name that same circumstance a temporary appearance on its way to being resolved by supply, you take the dominion back into your own hands. The money itself may not change in that instant, but the authority you hold over it changes immediately, and authority, held steadily, eventually reshapes appearance. This is the deep meaning underneath money, only answers to a name. It is not a poetic flourish. It is a literal description of how consciousness governs experience. Whoever names the condition governs the condition, and for most of your life you may have been handing that governance away, freely, casually, without ever noticing a transfer was taking place. Return to the shopkeeper for a moment. One afternoon a customer buys nothing, and he says under his breath, "See, told you, slow as ever." But suppose instead, just once, he caught himself and said quietly, "Business is picking up, more are coming." That single change of name does not fill the shop instantly, but it changes who is governing the shop. Fear was governing it before, and now a small, deliberate faith has taken the reins, even for one sentence, and one sentence, repeated daily, becomes a different store entirely within a season. Notice, too, that naming is never a single grand declaration made once and then forgotten. It is a small government you either hold or surrender many times before lunch. Third, consider the whisper beneath the word, because Florence Scovel Shinn was always careful to teach that it is not the word alone that carries power. It is the word joined to feeling. A sentence spoken flatly, without conviction, is like a seed dropped onto stone. It may be the right word, and still nothing takes root, because nothing beneath it welcomed it in. This is why so many people can recite a lovely affirmation in the morning and feel no different by noon. They spoke the word, but they did not feel it as true. They were performing a sentence rather than planting a belief. So this piece asks something a little braver of you. When you say, "I am supplied," pause long enough to actually let your chest soften around it. Let your shoulders drop half an inch. Let the sentence be felt in the body and not merely recited by the mouth. A felt word takes root, the way a seed pressed firmly into soil takes root. A word merely spoken and released into the air like smoke simply drifts away and changes nothing. Fourth, consider the timing. One of the most common mistakes is waiting for evidence to arrive before daring to change the name. People say, once the money actually shows up, then I will start speaking abundantly. But that order is entirely backward, and it will not work. Because the name must be spoken before the harvest, never after. The farmer does not wait for the wheat to appear before calling the field a wheat field. He calls it that the very moment he plants the seed, because he understands the name and the growth are joined together from the beginning. The name is part of what causes the harvest, not merely a label applied once the harvest is already visible to everyone. Florence Scovel Shinn taught, in her own words, that we must call the things that be not as though they were. This is not pretending. This is not delusion dressed up in spiritual language. This is aligning your speech with the direction your supply is already meant to travel, rather than with the temporary appearance currently sitting in front of your eyes. This is often the hardest piece for people to accept, because it feels almost dishonest to call yourself supplied while the account is thin. But consider, it is far more dishonest to keep calling yourself permanently broke, when brokenness was never your true and lasting nature to begin with. One name is only passing weather, the other is a false identity, mistaken for a permanent climate. Choose the name that matches your true climate, and let the weather change on its own time. Fifth, consider the daily practice. Because a tree is never grown by a single planting, it is grown by daily tending, watering, patience, and the refusal to dig the seed back up out of doubt, just to check whether it is working yet. This is where so many well-meaning people fail. Not because the principle itself is untrue, but because they plant the new name on Monday, see no visible change by Wednesday, and in frustration dig the whole thing back up, only to replant the old fearful name once again by Friday evening. Imagine a gardener who plants a seed, and then every single day pulls it back out of the ground just to inspect the roots. No seed on earth can grow under that kind of anxious supervision, and no new financial name can take hold in a mind that keeps yanking it back out through worried checking. Our shopkeeper tried his new sentence for 3 days, saw no difference in the register, and almost slid back into the old one, but he had heard, somewhere, that patience is not the same as waiting, so he kept speaking it, quietly, on the 4th day, and the 5th, not because he had proof yet, but because he had decided the sentence was true, regardless of the proof. And by the end of that month, a regular customer brought in 2 friends who had never once walked through his door before. Simply because she said the little shop always feels so warm lately, she could not have told you why, and neither could he. But the atmosphere had changed before the register ever did. And this, Florence Scovel Shinn taught, is the very posture that allows a root to finally take hold undisturbed. Sixth, consider how easily the old root disguises itself as realism. This is perhaps the sharpest trap of all, because no one thinks of themselves as speaking against their own supply. They think of themselves as simply being sensible, being practical, facing facts. But Florence Scovel Shinn would ask, whose facts? The fact of the appearance, or the fact of the truth beneath it? The appearance says the account is low, and that may be so for this moment, but the truth says supply is your nature, and appearances change while nature does not. When you call yourself broke in the name of honesty, you are not being honest. You are simply mistaking a passing weather report for a permanent forecast, and calling that mistake wisdom. Seventh, consider the fruit. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the outer world is simply the screen upon which the inner world is projected. So when the fruit finally appears, when the unexpected check arrives, when a bill is somehow covered with surprising ease, when a customer returns after weeks of quiet, when the debt that felt permanent quietly begins to close, that fruit was never random, and it was never luck. It was the tree finally showing what the root had been building all along, out of sight, underground, in the dark, which is where all real growth actually happens before it is ever visible to the eye. This means that even now, in whatever stage you find yourself in, even if you cannot yet see a single leaf above the soil, the root may already be alive and quietly working, simply because you have begun, today, to speak a truer name over your money and over yourself. So the seventh key, taken as a whole, is this: you are not managing money. You are tending a living root system with your very words. The root is the name you speak, felt as true and not merely recited. The growth is invisible and patient. The fruit is inevitable when the root is tended faithfully and left undisturbed by fear. And every single day you speak supply instead of debt, dominion instead of resignation, abundance instead of lack. You are not being unrealistic. You are being the most honest gardener in the whole field, because you are calling the field by the name of its harvest, and not merely by the name of its current, temporary, and passing appearance. I name my good, and my good finds me. The eighth key is this: all of this naming, all of this tending happens in a single place, and that place is now. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the now is the only moment in which the word has power. You cannot speak supply into yesterday, and you cannot speak it into some distant future that never quite arrives. You can only speak it here, into this very breath, and this is worth sitting with a little longer, because it is easy to nod along with it and still miss what it is actually asking of you. First, understand what the now is not. The now is not a mood. It is not a feeling of optimism you either have or do not have on a given morning. The now is simply this present instant, stripped of the story you are telling about it. Most people believe they are living in the present, but if you listen closely to their own words, they are almost never there. They are standing in this morning, while their whole heart is back in a January 3 years ago when the money trouble first began. Or they are standing in this morning while their whole heart is already out in a February that has not happened yet, worrying over a bill that is still weeks away. The body is present, but the consciousness is elsewhere. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that consciousness, not the body, is where the word does its work. So a word spoken with the body here and the mind somewhere else lands nowhere at all. It is like mailing a letter with no address on the envelope, sincere but undeliverable. Second, notice how the past quietly drains the now. This is not always dramatic. It is usually small and almost polite. You sit down to pay a bill, and before you even open it, a familiar sentence rises. Here we go again. This is what always happens to me. That sentence is not describing this bill. It is importing every bill you have ever dreaded and laying all of them on top of this one moment. So this simple, single, present task becomes buried under years that have nothing to do with it. Florence Scovel Shinn would ask you gently, is this bill, this one, right here, actually unbearable, or is it simply wearing the weight of every bill before it? When you can separate today's task from yesterday's wound, the task usually becomes lighter than you expected. And lighter tasks are handled with a clear mind rather than a frightened one. Third, notice how the future quietly drains the now in the opposite direction. Instead of dragging old weight forward, it reaches out and borrows trouble that has not even arrived. You get through today's bills perfectly fine, and then, instead of resting in that, you spend the evening rehearsing next month. What if the car needs repairs? What if the hours get cut? What if? And so the peace you actually earn today gets spent in advance on a future that may never even look the way you are imagining it. This is exhausting in a very particular way, because it means you rarely get to simply enjoy having made it through. You are always one moment ahead of your own relief. Fourth, let me give you a very ordinary picture of this. Imagine a woman standing in line at the pharmacy, waiting to pick up a prescription. She does not yet know the price. While she waits, her mind is not standing quietly in that line with her. It has already run 3 different scenarios. In the first, The price is high, and she is embarrassed at the counter. In the second, she remembers a similar moment 2 years ago, when a bill genuinely stretched her thin. In the third, she is dreading whatever bill is waiting for her at home that evening, by the time the pharmacist actually says the price, which turns out to be perfectly manageable. She has already lived through 3 imagined disasters that never happened. She paid, in tension, for scenarios that were never real. This is what it costs to live outside the now. And it is a cost most people are quietly paying every single day, without ever noticing the withdrawal. Fifth, here is the practice. And it is simple enough to do standing in that very line. When you feel yourself pulled into the old wound or the imagined disaster, pause, take one breath, and say quietly, right now, in this moment, I am provided for. Notice this is not a denial that bills exist. It is a refusal to let a moment that has not arrived, or a moment that has already passed, rob the one moment where your word can actually do something. This is also why patience feels so different from waiting. Waiting stretches toward the future for relief, and stays tense until it arrives. Patience stands calmly in the now, and trusts what cannot yet be seen. And the body always knows the difference between the two, even when the mind is slow to notice it. So practice gathering yourself back into now, several times a day if you must, at the pharmacy counter, at the mailbox, at the kitchen table with the bills spread out in front of you, and each time, simply say, right now, I am supplied, not tomorrow, not once the check clears, not once the debt is gone, but right now, because the now is the only ground firm enough to hold a spoken word. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the eternal now is where all true demonstration actually takes place. I stand in the now, and now is full. The 9th key is this, and it is the gentlest one. So let it land softly, once you have named your money correctly, once you have tended the root patiently, once you have gathered yourself into the now. The last movement is simply to receive, with open hands, without apology, without the old habit of shrinking back from your own good. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that many people unconsciously refuse the very supply they have been praying for, because somewhere inside they still believe they are not quite worthy of it, or that receiving too easily is somehow suspicious, so they will accept a small gift but talk themselves out of a large one. They will let a little unexpected money arrive, but immediately give a reason why it does not really count. Oh, it is just a coincidence. Oh, it will probably be needed for something else right away. That is the old name creeping back in at the exact moment the new name finally bore fruit. Consider a man who has spent years calling his money by its true name, speaking supply, speaking abundance, tending the root faithfully, and then one ordinary afternoon, a small refund arrives that he was not expecting, a modest overpayment returned to him quietly by a company he barely remembers dealing with. His first instinct, the old instinct, is to say, well, it is not much. It will just go toward the electric bill anyway. And in that single sentence, he has taken the very fruit he prayed for and quietly shrunk it back down to nothing. He has received it with one hand, while pushing it away with the other. This is the strange and common habit Florence Scovel Shinn watched so many of her students fall into, praying eloquently for supply, and then apologizing for it the moment it actually appears, as if the good were an intrusion rather than an answer. So the practice she taught instead was startlingly simple. When the good arrives, however small, however it comes, say thank you first, before any explanation, before any qualifying, before any hurrying to spend it away in your mind. Let the words be simply, thank you, this is mine, I receive it fully. Notice how different that feels in the body compared to the reflexive shrinking. The shrinking is tight and fast. The receiving is slow and open, like a bowl held out rather than a fist held closed. Imagine that same man, the second time a small unexpected sum arrives. choosing instead to hold it a moment longer in his mind, to let himself feel, briefly, that he is the kind of person good things come to. That is not vanity. That is simply agreeing with the truth his own root has been growing all along. This is the quiet completion of every key before it. You named the money correctly. You tended the root. You gathered yourself into the now. And here, at the very end, you simply open your hands and let the harvest land there without flinching. Money only answers to a name, and receiving graciously is itself a name, the name of one who expects good and is not embarrassed by it. I open my hands, and I keep them open. Here is the whole picture. It is not that money is scarce. It is that the wrong name was standing at the door. It is not that debt is your fate. It is that debt was simply an old word wearing your voice. It is not that your identity needs to end. It is that a false, borrowed self-concept needed to dissolve so the true one could finally step forward into the light. It is not effort alone that moves supply. It is an open channel that lets effort actually reach somewhere. It is not waiting that heals. It is patience resting quietly in the now. And it is not luck that brings the fruit. It is a root, tended daily in words, finally showing what it was building all along. Every key we walked through today was never 9 separate keys at all. They were 9 turns of the very same key. And that one key is simply this: money only answers to a name, and so do you. And the moment you begin calling both by their true and abundant name, the whole of your life begins quietly rearranging itself around the sound of that new voice. If you would like a steady hand to walk this with you daily, the Overflow Covenant was built exactly for this: a short daily practice in the Florence Scovel Shinn tradition, calling in supply by its true name, one gentle teaching and one spoken decree each morning. Simple enough to fit into any life, deep enough to actually change one. It is available now for a small one-time gift of $27, fully covered by a 30-day peace of mind guarantee. If it does not bless you, you are simply refunded. No questions. The link is in the description below. And if you feel led, let this be the next step in your walk. Say it once more with me now, before we part. I bless my money. I call it by its true name. My word is my wand. And so, whatever you have called your money until today, you are free, gently, patiently, and completely, to call it something truer starting now. Because money only answers to a name, and at last, you know which one to speak.